Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be taking a look at another one of BretherenLee's videos, this one entitled Yahweh Loves the Foreigner. Rather than try to explain a lot about what he's going to say or what he's going to try to accomplish, I'm just going to go ahead and let Lee introduce it himself.
Belongs to God. We're just like tenants on God's property. And so God expects his tenants to do what he says. And what did he say, Deuteronomy 10 in verse 17? It says, "For Yahweh your God is the God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, the mighty and the awesome, who doesn't respect persons or take bribes. He executes justice for the fatherless and widow and loves the foreigner in giving him food and clothing. Therefore, love the foreigner, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt." So notice, did God say he hates the foreigner? No, he says he loves the foreigner, doesn't he? He executes justice for them. And notice he gives them food and clothing, not just food, but clothing. So God is a lover of the foreigner.
Okay, so there's the premise. God loves the foreigner, and he demonstrates that by giving them food and clothing.
There was to be one law for the native and the foreigner.
Man, you can give a person whiplash by making lane changes that fast. 1 second he's talking about how God loves the foreigner by executing justice for them and giving them food and clothing. And then right out of the blue, here's just this blunt statement that there is to be one law for the native and the foreigner. Exodus 12:49 does say that, but there are a couple of minor issues with what Lee is doing here. One is he is cherry picking like crazy. He's pulling one verse out of context, and I'll share that context with you here in just a second, and you'll see what I mean. And the other is the way he couches it. He makes it look like you're supposed to modify your law in deference to the foreigner. But when you look at this verse in context, what you'll see is if the foreigner's going to live here and do our stuff, he is going to do it in compliance with our law, not his own. Let's look at the context and you'll see what I mean. Lee cites Exodus chapter 12, verse 49. But let's go back to verse 43 so that we get the whole picture. "And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it. But every man's servant who is bought for money," which would make them a slave, "when you have circumcised him, then he may eat it. A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it. In one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as a native of the land. For no uncircumcised person shall eat it. One law shall be for the native born and for the stranger who dwells among you." And that's not at all as simple as Lee laid it out to be, is it? Lee put verse 49 out there like it was some universal mandate. But what does the context actually say? Verse 43 says, "This is the ordinance of the Passover." That's not a global rule. Verse 43 says, "No foreigner shall eat it." Verse 45 says, "A sojourner and a hired servant shall not eat it." In the proper context, the one law for the native born and the foreigner that Lee's talking about says clearly that if you're a foreigner or a sojourner, you cannot participate in the Passover. That's the law. Now, the exception to that shows up in verse 48 when it says, "And when a stranger dwells with you and wants to keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and keep it, and he shall be as a native of the land." So what this is saying is, you don't get to come here and take Passover if you're not one of us. If you want to take the Passover, then you come here and you abide by our law. You come here and you meet the conditions necessary for the observance of Passover, namely that your males be circumcised. This isn't sojourners, foreigners getting a free pass. This is, if you're going to come here, you must abide by our law. So in a way, Lee's emphasis on verse 49 actually refutes his own statement. What do you say we check back in with Lee here really quick?
But as Jeremiah 7, 1-5 shows, God had to move them out of the land, and one of the reasons why he moved them out, because of the way they were mistreating the foreigner.
Lee does a couple of things in that little clip that are, frankly, intellectually dishonest. The first is that he minimizes what was actually going on in Israel, ignoring a lot of other things and really choosing to focus primarily on treatment of the foreigner. Now, he does make some offhanded reference to, in addition to other things, but he puts the treatment of the foreigner right out front. And his second technique is to apply that same moral judgment to all nations today. And it just isn't appropriate. If you really want to understand what I mean, go read the 7th chapter of Jeremiah. God isn't giving a general lecture on kindness. He's speaking to Israel about that land and their covenant. And even Jeremiah here doesn't name just one sin. He lists injustice, oppression of the foreigners, the widow, the orphan, shedding innocent blood, idolatry, trusting religious symbols while living in rebellion. God did not exile Israel from the land for their treatment of the foreigner. He exiled them for violation of the covenant into which they entered with him. And that difference is significant. Lee then fixes his sights on modern nations. And let's face it, if you listen to what he's saying, he's talking about the U.S. and he's talking about ICE and he's talking about immigration enforcement and deportations. Just look at the thumbnail he chose for his video.
And today we see how they are deporting them and treating them abusively.
Did Lee provide any evidence whatsoever to support his claims that people are being abused? No. Is that unusual for Lee? Not in the least. Early on in his video, Lee quotes Exodus 12:49 as demanding that there be one law for the native born and the foreigner. And that's true. That's a legit verse. What he didn't do is pay any respect to the context in which that verse was used, which was the law regarding Passover. And I've shown you how that all works. Now, there's no way he's going to accept that because it's fact, not moral outrage. Given that, let's try a different angle. Let's take that same verse, and much in the same way that it was applied to the Passover, let's apply it to immigration. In the case of the Passover, what was the condition? You had to meet the requirement of the Passover. Your men had to be circumcised. You had to be essentially of the Jews. All right, let's apply that to modern American immigration law. If you put it really simply, what is that law? You have to have permission to be here. Everyone who wants to live here has to meet that requirement. There aren't exceptions to that. And there are no less than 15 different kinds of ways that you can have permission to be here. The first and most obvious is that you're a native-born citizen, or you were born to American citizen parents overseas. You could be a naturalized citizen. You came here and did all of the studying and met all the requirements and became a U.S. citizen and were sworn in. Okay, you might be a lawful permanent resident. That's a green card holder. You might be here on a visa, a work visa, student visa, tourist, diplomatic. You might be here because of a humanitarian status, a refugee or an asylum seeker. And there are a number of different other transitional or special situations in which you might be here, but you're authorized to be here and you have the appropriate paperwork to back it up. All of those people in all of those categories share one thing in common. They are all meeting the requirement of the law. If you sneak across the border and have none of those, you are not meeting the requirements of the law, and you are not entitled to be here, just the same as the foreigner and the sojourner who were not circumcised were told over and over and over that they were not qualified to observe the Passover. It's a pretty simple concept. So there you have it, folks. We started out by letting Lee establish his premise, and then we looked at where the verse from Exodus 12:49 was taken out of context. We went back, corrected the context, went deep on that, and saw how it worked. We saw how Lee misrepresented the reasons that the Jews were exiled because of their covenant violations. And we saw him make some brief offhanded accusations against people who are deporting illegal immigrants to the United States, accusing them of abusive treatment. He provided no evidence of that. And then we applied Lee's mandate for one law for the native-born and for the foreigner to U.S. immigration law, and the requirement that if you're going to be here, you need to be here legally. We went point by point through that and showed that it's really very simple, and it's very, very close to the law of the Passover that is discussed in Exodus chapter 12. The balance of Lee's video is about him making implicit threats about what happens to people who mistreat the foreigner, and how basically if we keep doing immigration the way we're doing immigration, we're all going to get gathered up and burned in the lake of fire. He also talks about how the only solution to this is God's kingdom. Unfortunately, he has a Jehovah's Witnesses view of what God's kingdom is. That's just really unfortunate, but that's a subject for another day and another video. Thanks very much for watching.